Button Spadine for UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned. And I'm here today with Tripp Brower, the Executive Director of Apparent Winds. Tripp is up in Maine.
Yeah, I'm up in Maine right now on Vinyl Haven on the island and sailing up here and filming up here this summer.
Well, that's great. Tell us a little bit about Apparent Winds and what the whole program is.
So Apparent Winds, actually, the idea of it started in 2019. A buddy of mine decided to sail around the world, do a circumnavigation, and going around the world to collect stories from folks that are preserving environment and culture and gain their perspective. I met actually Kira Rumbu, who I'm sailing with now, who is a marine biologist, and we sort of put together this dream of doing the same mission, but on a much larger vessel for a much larger amount of time, just because you can't get to really know a community in a week or a couple of days and then sail on. It just doesn't make sense. And so in 2022, we actually ended up starting up Apparent Winds sort of 2.0, which is a 10-year round the world expedition aboard a sailing research vessel. And in addition to collecting oceanographic data and chartering the boat out to scientists, we also are continuing to film people all around the world that are preserving environment and culture. And we share those stories primarily through film.
So where did you start this voyage?
This current expedition started in Seattle, where we got the boat. And we did a lot of work to fix the boat up. And then we took off for Alaska and then headed down the west coast of North America and Central America.
You went through the Panama Canal, which is what we'll talk about later, because this whole conversation is going to focus on passage making. As a sailor, I race. So I go around buoys, or I go from point A to point B. So there are a lot of decisions that have to be made in passage making that I, as a racer, don't have to make. But Tripp, you are a passage maker. You do extended voyages.
Yeah, and I grew up sailing and racing as well, but passage making is a completely different animal. Don't sink and don't break the boat are the two big rules. But the last big passage that we made was from Panama to Florida. This was the second year in a row doing this route for us. The first time was on a Hinckley Bermuda 40, which has a tiny water line, 28.6 feet, 40 feet overall. And this time it was aboard Resilience, our current vessel, which is a 75-foot Palmer Johnson, John Alden design. But the passage is about 7 days, and we've gotten to the point where, we know the speed of our boat, we know the conditions, and we've gotten pretty good at estimating what a passage is going to look like. I don't like people to worry too much. I tell my mother, for instance, if the passage is, I think, going to be 20 days, I'll tell her it's going to be 25, because you never know, what's going to happen out there. But this passage from Panama, being the second year, you get to know the waters and the currents and the winds, and you can really get a good idea of what it's going to be like. In this case, the winds on your nose, swells on your nose for the first few days. We actually, instead of leaving the Canal District or Cologne, which is right there, we actually did a trip to the San Blas Islands, to Gunayala, where we filmed there. It's an indigenous community that's part of Panama, but also they see themselves as their own country. Beautiful place to visit, but it also gave us, I think, about 60 nautical miles of easting before we had to take off, because you want to head about due north, leaving Panama this time of year. And what happens is that time of year, which for us was in March, really it's Caribbean winds that you're dealing with. You have the Christmas winds coming in through that area, which you've probably heard of.
Oh, yes. But describe it.
So the Christmas winds almost just switch on, where the trade winds just go up from, maybe being 12 to 15 to 20 to just almost constant 20s or higher. And these trade winds over the winter, basically, fall, winter, and early spring, just channel across the Caribbean and can cause some pretty serious swell. And, if you're heading out of Panama, you're heading straight into that, because towards the end of the Caribbean, the trade winds funnel down towards Panama a little bit. So that's what you're facing when you first leave. So you have all that swell that's been picking up across the Caribbean and some good wind right on your nose for the first 3 days.
So you've got sea state you're worrying about there. You've got wind direction and wind speed.
Right. And you're looking at it, it's almost like looking at a race course. Instead of racing one day, you're racing, several days. But, we know that we're going to have wind on the nose for the first few days, and we're looking at the wind, we're looking at the swell. I actually look at weather patterns months in advance and start watching almost every day. I use Predict Wind, and I download a grid file, and I just watch it every day. I'll look and see and start to understand what those patterns look like, and you'll start to see the fluctuation of where the wind comes from, how it's behaving, and you have to think about the season, um, swell conditions, and then the last thing besides wind and swell and sort of storms or whatever you might be looking out for is piracy. Is a really big one, which also is not something you typically deal with on the race course.
Clearly not. You may have some port tackers, but it's rarely pirates. Now, where are the pirates coming out of? Central America?
Central America, South America, Venezuela, as far as I know, is still a little bit of a hotbed. In 2019, we actually stayed at least 50 miles offshore of any Venezuelan territory just to stay away. And we ran dark at night, which is a very common practice. This time around, Panama had just had a pirate attack. Actually, one of our friends was pirated in Panama on the Pacific side, which is a little bit more rare there. Guatemala and Nicaragua especially have been known for some pretty heavy piracy in the last few years.
Interesting. Let's go back to your comments on weather and watching the predict winds and all that. Do you have a meteorological background, or is it just something you just picked up?
I grew up on the water and paying attention to weather, and so that definitely helps. But no, I don't have a meteorological background. I will say when I first started with our circumnavigation in 2019, I was nervous and I was just doing my best. I think a golden rule for any passage making and sailing, any ocean or any body of water is ask other people, and just ask as many people as you can that you think, might know what they're talking about. Maybe take some things with a grain of salt because everybody has their own experience. I asked a lot of questions when we first started, and I still do, even if I've done the passage, what I've learned or what I've gotten used to. For me, I use Predict Wind offshore and use those grid files. I had considered hiring, somebody to help us do passage routing when we sailed from Panama to the Marquesas. And that was a 30-day passage offshore. After reading and studying, we just did the passage and it was beautiful.
So you've explained some of the conditions that you could possibly face. The one thing that you didn't mention, though, was the time of year.
The first time I did this in 2021, I left in December. In 2022, I left in March. But we're still in the same season where you're in these Christmas winds. But the thing is, you want to be out of the Caribbean before hurricane season. If you are heading from Panama, from the Pacific to the Caribbean and heading out, really you want to get out and get up north to Florida if you want to stay out of that area come hurricane season. And it seems like tropical weather is starting earlier and earlier and earlier each year. And so, for us, I've done it in December and I've done it now in March. Same passage in very, very similar conditions.
So those are the natural issues that you have to deal with. Talk to me a little bit about boat setup and preparation from a more mechanical and operational perspective of getting ready for a passage.
Just like it would be anywhere else, but it just means a lot more. I always start with through hull. Leave the rigging alone for now. Just the hull and the boat itself. Are your through hulls secure? Are they in good shape? Are all your seacocks functioning well? Checking the hoses and everything that might be going to those through hulls to make sure that they're in good shape, and everything has at least 2 hose clamps and that sort of thing. You really want to make sure that stuff is secure. You're in a boat that's designed very well to stay afloat. So you really want to make sure that your boat's secure and that you're keeping water out. That's for me rule number 1. So when I prepare, I start there, and that's a really nice way to keep my head clear.
Do you have redundancies and repairs and extras?
Oh my God, yeah. So yeah, I have boxes and bags full of hose clamps. I keep several different sizes of hose always aboard. Always keep a good set of tools for various different needs. I have all sorts of different types of sizes and designs of plugs, wood plugs or rubber plugs for different things. I mean, all the way from sail tape and stitching materials to pieces of rubber, things that you might not expect. Obviously, your roll of duct tape, plenty of line, and I kept a big sheet of very heavy duty fiber impregnated plastic under a bunk on my last boat for impacts, so that I had something I knew exactly where it was, that if we hit something in the ocean, we could wrap this piece of material on the outside of the hull and stop some of that leaking that you might have from an impact. so that you can do something about it for it on the inside. And the same goes for redundancy and bilge pumps. I check the bilges all the time while we're sailing. We have a manual pump, but also a electric pump that I know where the extension cord is. I already have a hose for it that I've measured out that can fit out several different places of the boat, and I know where that is, and it's ready to go if I have some sort of issue. But
Yeah.
rule number one is keeping the water out of the boat, and then rule number two is double check everything all the time. Check your rig. It's always the cotter pin or the ring ding that's gonna get you. It seems
It's the 25-cent fitting that brings the mast down.
exactly.
Talk about the rig and the sails and preparation there.
Similar to the hull, where you don't want to let any water in. Rigging first comes to strength, checking our standing rigging, making sure that it's up to date. I've seen boats cross and make it on the other side of the Pacific. And, it wasn't rare to see a boat losing their mast or losing side stays because they didn't really do the proper preparation and proper check and refit for a boat to cross an ocean. So, making sure that rigging actually is in good shape is so important. You have no support when you're out there. There's not a dock in the middle of the ocean. And then when you get to the other side, if you're sailing across the Pacific to French Polynesia and you end up on some small island in the Marquesas, it's not like there's a rig shop there. So you're not going to get the help you need as soon as you get
Yeah, I need some Dyneema for this.
there. Right. Good luck. Good luck. For me, definitely then it also comes to lines. If you have a halyard snap or something like that when you're offshore, especially if you don't have many hands on deck, you have a huge problem. It's not just losing a race out there. And it always happens, of course, at the worst time possible. So, making sure those lines are in good shape. You're looking for chafing, which when you're doing a month at sea sailing, things chafe and things wear faster than you might think. And then sails, lastly, but just as importantly. This boat actually that I'm on right now, Resilience, had a set of very old sails. I thought we could get away with them. And turns out that they were actually a lot worse shape than I thought. I couldn't put them up in heavy weather because if they ripped or they had some sort of issue, all of a sudden I have a ton of canvas up and it's a lot harder to control and get down when the wind's up.
You worked with Stuart Dahlgren up in the Pacific Northwest for UK Sailmakers.
Yep.
How has he helped you along?
Yeah, well, we were thrilled. We were up in Alaska and coming down through British Columbia and got to meet Stuart and see the loft, which was incredible. Really clean shop, really nice people. And Stuart came aboard and checked out our rig, was able to take some measurements and give us some advice on what we could do. And that was a really nice way to start the whole process of getting new sails for the boat because we could actually talk to somebody and have a back and forth. After talking to Stuart for a while, there's not just Dacron out there, obviously, and being a racer, that we actually decided to go with a hybrid with Dyneema. We wanted something that could hold their shape for a long time. You end up reefing your jib a lot, as far as rolling it up on the furler. And we're going for 10 years on this expedition. So we wanted something that would last that time. And so Stuart helped us sort of think through the process, pros and cons. The material we use is a little bit more expensive, but if you really think about it, not getting a new set of sails after 3 or 4 or 5 years is huge. It's just a nice process getting this boat re-rigged.
Tripp, you said you're on a 75-foot catch. Talk to us a little about sail plan setup, what you use in different conditions.
It is a big boat, and what I like about this catch is that we can sail this with 2 people if we need to. And the thing I like about a catch is that we have 2 masts, which means that we have more options. But really, for us, what it comes down to, and I think for offshore passages, is making sure that you have options to shorten sail and to, manage the wind and manage the ocean conditions as best as possible. So for us, I like that the mizzen that we just got aboard from UK, we have 2 reefing points. The largest reef is significant where I can bring that sail down and make it very small, but I still want cloth up, to keep the boat balanced, to keep our forward motion. Secondly, we have 2 forward sails. We have a Yankee and then we have a staysail. Both those I love. We went with the Yankee because, again, it's a little bit more manageable than a full-footed Genoa. And if you have ocean swell and waves, you're less likely to catch those waves on your sail. And that also gives you a little bit better visibility too, which is nice. That's on a electric furler. And so our staysail, we went with a manual furler, which again, for things breaking at sea, I like that we have a smaller sail that we can roll out. That's all manual. Of course, I have an extra line that can replace our furler line. I have extra sheets in case a sheet chafes. It's all about management. And that's the big difference, I think, of sailing offshore compared to sailing inshore or racing.
If you were to give three critical suggestions to me, as I'm about to set off from New York here down to the islands, what would you suggest that I do?
First, look at weather. You can't change it once you leave. So sort of rule number one is make sure that you have a good window and don't rush it. Don't set a date where you say that you need to leave on the 11th, because if the weather's not good on that date, then you're going to just throw yourself in trouble. And I've made that mistake plenty of times, especially because we have scheduling, issues. The other rule I really love is if you think you should reef, do it. Don't wait. Second is go through everything, every system, every part of the rigging that you can. Once again, go up the mast, tape, different pins and, different parts of the rigging that you can tape so they don't get loose or so they don't chafe on something on a line or a sail. But, the big things, if you're heading, let's say from New York down to the Caribbean, make sure that you have a good weather window and start off on the right foot. Check your seacocks and through hauls and all the hoses that would be a risk for letting water into your boat unexpectedly. Check your bilge pumps, to go along with that, and all the systems to pump water out of the boat. Just go through everything and look at it and make sure that you feel confident. So often with a boat that's sitting for a while, things break somehow. A boat that sits, it just seems like things fall apart. It's a constant state of entropy. So you go through everything. That would be huge. And then lastly, I'd say is the right people aboard. The kind of people that I know, they can be patient, they have good attitude, and they're willing to put in the work.
That's great. What about provisioning?
Provisioning, especially if you're going for a month, what I typically do is go day by day, meal by meal, and you just get a little bit of a equation going. So we're the three of us, so we want to have 6 eggs a day. Multiply that times 7. How about lunch? Yeah, and you get used to it. It's pretty easy. And I always overestimate, just because you never know what's going to happen, whether you're out at sea longer than you think, or you get to where you're going. And provisioning is not what it is in the United States as it is in, let's say you land in Antigua. Everybody has their different things that they might want to board.
Just, I guess, one last question, because you were talking about things like Antigua, different places like that. What about customs? How can you prepare for that?
Most cases, customs actually are extremely easy. You can prepare, you can go on to a country's website and you can find the information there. There's a lot of people sharing a lot of information online, what to look out for, what to have, what you don't need. But generally, I'd say it's not as bad as you might think. Make sure you have your passports, make sure you have your boat's documentation in order. They'll ask you the same questions everywhere you go, your length, other dimensions of the boat, how many people aboard, food items or agriculture items and that sort of thing. So you want to avoid bringing those things when you can. But in most cases, it's really an easy process and you meet really nice folks.
Before we close then, Tripp, what's next?
For us, we're up in Maine for a couple more weeks and then we're sailing to southern New England. We're actually working on a partnership with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So we'll step back through there. And we're filming down in southern New England. And then we have about a 6-month refit in Charleston, South Carolina. From there, next year in 2024, we'll take off probably to head back up north towards Greenland. And then I think back south and back to Panama again. And then we're around the world for the next 10 years, maybe a couple of times around.
Well, that's great. Keep us posted as you go along. Tripp Brower, thank you very much for joining us for UK Sailmakers Lessons Learned. This is Buttons Fadine.
Thanks so much.